I will be discussing ethnic identity and acculturation theory. This theory is a little bit nerve-wracking as the writers of our textbooks start off with a definition or an explanation that says there is no universal definition of the concept of ethnic identity in literature. So that leaves me with a lot of questions. How can you actually define ethnic identity and apply it to college students or into the classroom? So, according to the textbook, ethnic identity is the culture, religion, geography, language, and practices shared by individuals connected by loyalty and kinship. So, ethnic identity is different than racial identity, as it does not focus on biological makeup of a student, but rather the cultural or the identity found within a group of individuals. So there's two components of ethnic identity. The first one being the external ethnic identity. So when we see the external, we see recognizable social and cultural behaviors, languages, traditions, friendships with other members, and involvement in group activities. In my college teaching experience, I work a lot with students of various different countries. And I have found that my students from uh, Pakistan or Tunisia or Japan and China tend to cling to, of course, those whom they identify with because of these recognizable social and cultural behaviors. Sometimes my Japanese students are very intimidated by the external ethnic identities of white Americans because we tend to be much more in the college setting, much more personable and or much more laid back than the Japanese teachers. So it's an interesting view of an external ethnic identity, sort of a conflict. The other component of ethnic identity is the internal ethnic identity. So that is the cognitive view of self, the group, and traditions. It also talks about the moral obligations to their heritage and values. Then there's the affective dimension, that is attachment, feelings, and affinity to seek out similar members and cultural patterns. The cognitive view is the most interesting to me because it is interesting to understand how different cultures view the concept of self. Most of my Latino American students do not simply live a self-centered life because their identity is completely founded in their family. So it is more about a group identity than this view of being your own, being yourself. So I think it's an interesting concept when we look in the college classroom that my students that I have had of Latin American identity have they have made their priorities different in the classroom many times because they put family absolutely first. So how does this impact the classroom experience? So ethnic identity has an interesting impact because we look at the ethnic language proficiency. So I taught, I teach a lot of students who have Hispanic or Latino American backgrounds who don't speak Spanish, but people assume that they do because of their names and or the way that they look. And so there's an interesting conflict when they physically look like a group and they ethnically may identify with a group through traditions and norms, but their language proficiency is different. However, on the flip side, you may have people who um, submerge themselves only in the ethnic language proficiency and they want to speak their native tongue. The parental cultural influence has a lot of impact on the classroom. With how the parent acts or how the parent supports a student's education. My Indian students, oftentimes their parents put a lot of pressure on them to be perfect, to do well, to be number one. Peer interactions are another way to look at ethnic identity in the classroom because oftentimes students who identify with one another will interact with those who are like them. It seems to be human nature. We look at also socioeconomic status. In the South, there are lots of stereotypes that people believe if you are of Hispanic or Latino American descent, then you are illegal or you are poor, and they're looked down upon. So this can have an impact in the classroom in that you might not have an equal respect for all students. And of course, we have the difference between the ethnic identity and racial identity. I have had the privilege of teaching numerous students who were adopted from different countries and raised in white Anglo-Saxon homes. In fact, my niece was adopted from China. And while she has a racial identity of being Asian American, adopted from China, her ethnic identity is very lacking because she has an American name and she speaks zero Chinese and she doesn't actually love Chinese food. So it is interesting how ethnic identity can cause a shift with some students in the classroom, and people make assumptions about ethnic identity. So with talking about ethnic identity, we also have to discuss something called acculturation. The definition of this is the extent to which an individual absorbs the dominant culture. So I wanted to talk about John Barry's model of acculturation because I think it kind of gives us a good view of what's happening to a college student's identity when they identify with a particular ethnic group. So we look at assimilation, where individuals solely identify with the dominant culture. They let go of all ties to their own culture. Many times when my international students come to Gadsden State to study, they try to dress as American as possible. Marginalized. Individuals reject their own group and the host culture. So they find conflict and it becomes very difficult at times. Separate. Individuals identify slowly with their culture and reject the host culture. I always think of, when I was reading this earlier, I was thinking about Pablo Picasso and how he, of course, was a famous artist, but he was from Spain. And in Spain, there are 4 different languages, and he was fluent in the Basque Catalan language. And even though he knew English as well as Castilian Spanish, he refused to speak any other language except the Basque language. So when he would have interviews with people and the reporter would be speaking in Castilian Spanish that Picasso understood, Picasso would still make the reporter have a translator to translate it to him because he refused to identify with the Castellano culture. He was 100% Basque Catalan culture. It's very interesting acculturation. Integrate. Individuals become bicultural by maintaining aspects of their own group and selectively acquire some of the host culture. So these students are integrated. They are trying to find their identity in both the dominant and their culture. So we talk about Finney's model of ethnic identity theory. Finney studied the importance of ethnicity to minority group members in identity development. So she wanted to look at how ethnicity impacted group members in and out of the classroom. So stage 1, the unexamined ethnic identity, where individuals may not have actually explored their own ethnicity. They may be disinterested. This reminds me of the book and the movie Lion that came out this year. A young man from India is adopted by an Australian parents, and he does not explore his identity until he becomes an adult and has an encounter that makes him interested. So some minority students may initially accept attitudes of the dominant culture, but many students just see it as a non-issue, and they just don't examine it. It doesn't become a part of their true identity. However, these students can come into stage 2, which is where the ethnic identity search begins. So they can remain in stage 1 for a very long time, and something might happen where they have to actually encounter a situation where they start thinking about their own ethnic identity. And sometimes these situations can be caused by racism or can be a gradual effect. I think in 2016, 2017, we've seen this a lot of different ethnic groups are starting to understand the importance of their identity in the United States. So this becomes a moment where individuals start talking with friends and families. They read literature, they take courses, they want to learn customs, and they attend different cultural events. And then there's stage 3, which is our ethnic identity achievement. So they resolve these ethnic identity conflicts and they start accepting memberships to their culture and others. They're open to learn new things. Of course, this can allow for students to develop confidence and resolve conflict within themselves and others, especially when you think about racial slurs or jokes. And if someone is not completely secure in their ethnic identity, that can become such a pivotal part or such a painful fight every day. So then we want to look at what the issues and limitations are for ethnic identity development. The first thing is that there's not a lot of longitudinal studies that include substantial data. There's lots of smaller studies that have a few hundred participants, but nothing on a larger scale. So there needs to be larger sample sizes. There also needs to be research across a wider range of ages. There are very few that study children in K-12 versus college and how these things influence one another. During my research for this presentation, I found 2 really interesting websites. So one of them is called usingtheirwords.org, and it is actually a website here, and it's called Social Justice Education. And even though people are encouraged to use in the K-12 classroom, I think that the 6 tenets or the principles of it are quite applicable to the college setting or in the classroom. And so looking at how we could design curriculum in the college classroom to fit ethnic identities that would encourage opportunities for students to learn who they are and where they came from. So the 6 steps that they discuss here range from self-love and knowledge to respect for others to issues of social injustice, and then social movements for change and awareness raising, and then ending with social action. So I think that even though these things or this website is created for K-12, I think that there's a lot of things that we could learn in the college classroom through these steps. I also found at Kansas State University, they had created a resource for educators about ethnic identity and understanding awareness and self-identification and attitudes, behaviors, and looking at how a student experiences these changes. They also have some really great teaching components that will offer more explanation or more support for teachers. So while this is a limited theory on resources and studies, I think it's very important today in the 2017 as we see so many ethnic groups coming under fire or being discriminated against. So I think it's something we need to definitely bring into our classroom.